Good evening. No response. Well, you might say, well, what's so good about it? Yeah? Well, the good is you've been chanting Govinda Jai Jai, Gopala Jai Jai. That's what's good about it. Usually we begin anything auspicious by chanting the names of God, names of Krishna. Govinda and Gopala are also names of Krishna. And before we begin speaking, we also invoke auspiciousness by chanting a few mantras. That's the tradition. So I'll just chant a few mantras as is our custom, and then try to share a few thoughts on the topic that I've been asked to speak on before you today. Om Ajnanatimiraandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Satvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padang Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Welcome to this week's Urban Yoga program. It's my pleasure and honor to be amongst all of you once again. I usually come here once a year. I've been here twice before. And it's a pleasure to see some old faces. You're an old face. I mean, you're young, but you're an old face. Old in the sense that I've seen you before, right? And of course, some I don't recognize, which is also good. Because there should always be new faces. But the old faces must also continue, right? And that's what makes the world such a nice place, a combination of the old and the new. And it moves on like that. So thank you for coming. Today's topic is the instant paradigm of happiness. Here today, gone tomorrow. That's pretty much the formula for what goes by the name happiness today. Here today, gone tomorrow. Very temporary. That's not actually happiness even. From a spiritual point of view, what's here today and gone tomorrow isn't really happiness at all. It's just a dim reflection of real happiness. We may call it pleasure. We may call it enjoyment. We may call it any other name, but it isn't true happiness. True happiness is something quite different. It's a different species. Easy come, easy go. You've heard the proverb? Anything which is very easily achieved also goes away easily. Anything that starts on a very fickle, unstable, unsteady platform is bound to disappear very quickly. Things that sustain are those that have been built steadily over a period of time, assiduously cultivated, painstakingly, meticulously built up over a long period of time, like a good relationship. Something that is built up despite some deficiencies, despite mistakes and weaknesses. For example, a good relationship doesn't sustain or is not called a good relationship only when there's some instant attraction between two people, let's say. And then people think, well, yes, there's love at first sight, such a nice thing, and there's instant appeal. But if that instant appeal has to sustain into a meaningful, long-term, good, happy relationship, then there must be something more than just that instant attraction. Because we may be attracted to somebody, but when you start spending time with that person, then you realize this person is a human being, not a goddess or a god. And therefore you're dealing with a person who's all too human, who's got defects, who's got different ways of thinking than you and I do perhaps, and who may have other features and characteristics which we may not really like sometimes, or they may do things or say things in the way we don't like, and we have to deal with it. Sometimes they may make genuine mistakes. So, what do? As humans, if we don't learn how to take these in our stride, if that instant attraction is the only basis for us to have a relationship, it will not be possible. It will crumble. Unless one takes into account the reality that one must take in one's stride our own weaknesses, the other person's weaknesses. Our relationship must be based on something more foundational, something more solid, something more meaningful. And therefore one learns to forgive, one learns to forget. So all relationships that have sustained in the long run are those that have these features. There's mutual understanding, there's patience, there's tolerance, there's understanding, there's forgiveness, there's the ability to forget, not the good things, but the bad things. And that's what anything good or sustainable rests on. And I mentioned about relationships because that's really something that's of concern to everybody today. Just yesterday I met one person and he said, just as I was about to leave to come to meet you, there was a strange scene that happened outside my house. He said there was a young man who was only in trousers, he didn't have a shirt, and he was with a young lady, and they were having a very fierce and loud argument on the street. And everyone around was able to hear what they were, and they were speaking at the top of their voice. And then the lady left, she just went away in a huff. And the young man just went on his knees and started sobbing right there in the middle of on the footpath in the street and the houses all around. So he said it's a rather painful thing to see. And just the moment I stepped out of my house, this is what I saw. This is just yesterday. And then he made an interesting observation. He said, in many breakups happen in the long Easter weekend. So I said, why? What's the correlation? He said, because people spend time with each other. Otherwise, they're so busy doing their own thing and then they meet for a short while. So it's all right. You're just there for a little while together. But when you start spending time with each other and you realize the other person's human weaknesses or human tendencies perhaps, and we realize our own human tendencies and weaknesses, then it strikes us. And then we realize, oh really, I don't want to live with this person. And then some there's a disruption, there's disturbance in the relationship. This is an unfortunate situation that we see happening so many times over and over again. Maybe not exactly in this way as I described. But generally we see that when anything, be it a relationship or be it anything, is based on something very quick, easy come, easy go. I'm not saying that we should necessarily try to do what I'm about to describe, but I'm just trying to make a point on how people's world views were different. Nowadays, it's very politically incorrect to speak of people coming together in a relationship by somebody else's arrangement. Usually people would like to establish their own relationships, and which is fine. But in the olden days, in the land where I come from, India, it was quite common to find relationships or marriages that were arranged. And ironically, they were the ones that lasted the longest. I know one gentleman here who was born in India and lives in Sydney. He's 75 years old. And he was about to celebrate his 50th wedding anniversary. I said, 50th wedding anniversary? That's something rare in this world. And then he said, the first time I saw my wife was when I got married to her, at the time of the marriage ceremony. And we just understood. So I said, how did you do this? It would be shocking if you even say this to people nowadays. They'll think there's something wrong with you, or they'll think it's something really very, very unusual. So how have you made it in these 50 years? What's the secret of your long-lasting relationship? How have you been able to live together happily? You both look such a happy couple even after 50 years of living together. What's the secret? So he replied that we understood that we had to live together, and we knew we had to make it work, and we did what it took to make it work. So we knew it called for sacrifice. We knew it called for tolerance, adjustment, and so on and so forth. And we both had our share of doing things. We're quite different as people, he said. But we managed to make that adjustment because we understood, our mindset was that we want to make it work. And they had a common foundation, they had a common understanding. So they understood there was something that was beyond just instant attraction. Today, unfortunately, we want everything quickly. We don't have patience. As the days go by, we are not willing to work long and hard for something sublime and something good. We don't mind working hard maybe, but then we want instant results after working hard. So also with our happiness. We want our happiness now, here and now. And therefore what happens as a result of that is the happiness comes here today, gone tomorrow. When you want something that is long-lasting, you have to take time to work on it. Otherwise it wouldn't happen, it won't last. I remember a little anecdote. You've all heard about the Taj Mahal, I'm sure. So in the days when it was made, more than 500 or whatever number of years ago, they didn't have cement in those days. So they had to make mortar out of lime, and they had various other things that mix sand and lime and a few other things, sticky substances and so on. And the thing with the mortar prepared traditionally was that the longer you worked on it, the harder it would become when it's set. And the longer lasting would be the structure. Modern cement structures have a life of maybe 50 to 100 years. After that, it's considered unsafe in modern constructions. But constructions that have been made out of mortar, lime mortar, made in a traditional way in different countries, they've lasted for centuries. Therefore, you see ancient monuments in all continents, even the ancient churches in Europe, or the ancient government buildings, or the temples and so on in India. They were all made hundreds of years ago, and they're so strong. You can't break them down. I remember one gentleman wanted to break down a house that his ancestors had built, and he wasn't able to do it easily. It took him a long time and a lot of expense. He had to call in all sorts of, eventually, machinery to break it down because it was so hard, it was so solid. So that mortar it takes time to set, and you really have to work at it. Cement is easy to make. You make it quickly, there's a given formula, a little setting time, some time, but not much. But then it doesn't last that long. Whereas the mortar takes a long time to set. And the longer time you take to make it, the longer and the stronger the structure will be. So there was this craftsman who was preparing the mortar. And he was doing it for the whole day, and he had been doing it for a couple of days. So he had been molding it, kneading it. And his supervisor got so impatient that he started shouting at him and said, "What are you doing here? You're a lazy person, you're trying to avoid your work. You've been doing the same thing for 4 days. I've been watching you." So the craftsman or the mason got so angry, he lifted that lump that he had been working on for so many days and threw it at him. And the supervisor managed to duck. And the mortar that the man had thrown went and stuck on the wall. And that piece of mortar is still there on the wall of the Taj Mahal. It won't come out. And that's the quality of the material he had used. Because he was working on it. So what came out was something really solid. Imagine if the supervisor hadn't intervened, then this would have gone into the normal, construction. And that's why these old structures are so strong, because they've been painstakingly built over a long period of time. They would take years, sometimes generations to build. And now you have buildings that can be built in a jiffy, and they can be broken down in a jiffy, and they don't last too long either. So similarly with happiness, if we want happiness that can last, and that doesn't stop, then we have to ensure that we have cultivated that happiness in a very methodical way. The moment we start seeking instant gratification, instant pleasure, there we are doomed. Because that happiness, that pleasure is here today, gone tomorrow, here now, gone a moment later. In the ancient Vedic text, the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna gives a very simple formula for the happiness of this world. He says that what we call happiness in the world, which is actually just pleasure, is nothing but the scratching, is like a scratching sensation. When you have an itch on the body and you scratch, and then it seems so nice, it feels nice as you scratch it, but then as you scratch it more and more and more, eventually it feels nicer and nicer and nicer, but then eventually it turns into a festering sore. This is in the Bhagavatam actually. So the happiness of this world, the instant happiness that we're talking about, is just that itching and the scratching. And then what comes out at the end of it is something that doesn't last at all. And it has a very bad effect, because you get a sore at the end of it. So attempts at instant pleasures in this world also have such an effect. They have a harmful effect. And then also the so-called happiness doesn't last for long at all. Take any such pleasure. Take any form of happiness that gives you instant happiness, and you'll see it's not long lasting. So Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita describes happiness as being that which is endless, which has no beginning, or rather which has no end, which may have a beginning as far as we are concerned in our life, but it has no end. In Sanskrit it's called Ananta. Ananta means that without end, that which is without end. So we want that kind of happiness, isn't it? We don't want a kind of happiness that's there now and then gone the next moment. We want happiness that will last and last and last. But is there such happiness? Or is it just some utopia? Is it just some illusion that we are chasing? Is it a mirage? Does such happiness actually exist? Yes, it does. But before we talk about that kind of happiness, the real happiness, it's important to also analyze the nature of what we call happiness in this world. So one can paraphrase Krishna's words in the Bhagavad Gita and say that the happiness of this world is like a sandwich. A sandwich that has practically no filling, very little filling, very thin layer of butter maybe. And you have very thick slices of bread on either side. So the slice on top is like the effort, the struggle that you put in to get that happiness. That's painful. And the lower slice is like the pain that happens as a result of that pleasure, and what you have in between, the filling, the slim filling, the layer, is the pleasure you derive from that. So happiness in this world is like a little bit of pleasure, just a drop. You have to undergo such a hard struggle to get that pleasure, and that's painful. And then at the end of it, it has its consequences. For example, alcohol, cigarettes, any form of intoxication like drugs and so on, they all have their effect. I'll tell you a little story from the Mahabharat, which is a very, very interesting and fascinating text. And there's many, many stories and sub-stories within it. It's an allegorical story. It basically talks about the nature of the pleasure of this world. It talks about this one man who was lost in the forest. And it was a dense forest. And as he proceeded to walk through the forest, he was surrounded by all sorts of wild animals and, very strange creatures. And he ran for his life. And then he stumbled. His legs were intertwined in some creepers, and he fell headlong into a cavity that he later realized was an empty, dry, old well. And as he lay there hanging, head down, feet up, hanging upside down, his feet caught by the creepers. And he looked down and he saw there was a fierce snake at the lower end, right at the bottom of the well. And then he looked up as best as he could, and he saw there was a dangerous animal peering down at him from the top, waiting for him to come up so that he could devour him. And then there were, ants and insects biting him. And then there were rats who were nibbling at the creepers from which he was hanging. And that was his predicament. And what happened is, there was a beehive on the branch just above that, a branch of a tree just above that well. And a few drops of honey would fall from that. And somehow or the other, by the arrangement of providence, it so happened that a few drops of the honey, he was positioned in such a way that the honey was dropping exactly on his cheek as he was lying, hanging there upside down, and it would trickle down to his lips, and then he would move out his tongue and then taste that little drop of honey. This is so nice. So he was busy trying to taste that, and then he was waiting for the next drop. When's that next drop going to come? Ah, there it is. Yes, now it's sliding down, it's sliding down. Here it is, here it is. Okay, that's it. Beautiful, lovely, delicious honey. And he was so absorbed in, in trying to taste those few drops of honey, forgetting his very dangerous predicament. So therefore, I'm cutting the story short actually. It's a very elaborate story with metaphors and analogies and so on. But that is supposed to represent the predicament of the living entity in this world, who is surrounded by all sorts of dangers. Death can come anytime, old age will come, disease will come, various sorts of miseries are natural to life in this material world. And the person is thinking about the few drops of honey that he or she is going to get. The honey represents the forms of material pleasure that we have in this world, the instant happiness. So we're just waiting. I had a few moments of that pleasure now, and a little more. When will that come? When will that come? We are waiting for a few drops of that honey to come again. Okay, there it is. Yes. And that's what makes life worth living for many, many people in this world. But just see, it's a very dangerous predicament. The taste of that honey is very short-lived. And all the while there's such a danger there. If the rats succeed in nibbling the creeper, eventually they will. He's going to fall down, and there's a snake out there waiting with his mouth wide open, a big python, waiting with his mouth wide open. And that's metaphorically what death is supposed to be. Death is compared to a snake that's waiting with its mouth open, and we're already halfway into it. And we don't know when we'll be fully swallowed by the snake of time. And then there's so many other things going on. We are being bitten by insects and so on. We are being harassed by miseries of all sorts, inconveniences of all sorts. Nobody is immune. As we were driving to come here, there was a person who was in the wrong lane. He wouldn't let us turn left. He was there, parked, and he wanted to go straight. And so we were there, and I was thinking, I'll get late for the program. And then because of the crowd, the signal was turning green, but we couldn't move because the signal ahead was blocked. So we were just sitting there because this person in front of us wasn't in the right lane. So whatever you may do, there's these little things, numberless things in life will irritate us. There's no peace in this world. It's not possible. Every little thing and every big thing in life will come to cause some irritation in our life. Something somebody does, something somebody says, which we don't like or which is inconvenient to us. And in the midst of all this, we survive on those few drops of honey. That material pleasure, that instant gratification that we seek. And in the course of trying to just get those few drops, we forget inquiring whether there's anything else. Is there any other standard of happiness at all? The Bhagavad Gita informs us, yes, there is. There is something called eternal life. There is something called eternal happiness. That joy, unfortunately, doesn't exist in the things of this world. It can exist in this world, but not when you look for them in the things of this world. You can experience that happiness here and now, but not in the things of this world. You can experience real happiness in something that is beyond this world. For example, as we were chanting Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya a short while ago, felt some happiness. And you may think, well, I also felt that happiness when I went to a music concert the other day. There was some rock concert and I went there and I also felt the same there. Maybe I felt even better. But there's a difference. You see, the happiness that you feel in a rock concert is temporary. The effect is temporary. But the happiness we feel when the names of Krishna are chanted are actually something that have a long-lasting effect on the heart. Because they make our consciousness more and more amenable to spiritual life. And as we move on hearing more and more and more, then we become more spiritually inclined. Now we want to understand the philosophy. We want to hear more and more about Krishna, what real happiness is. And we understand that real happiness doesn't exist on the platform of the body. Real happiness exists on the platform of the soul. The relationship of the soul with Krishna is a relationship of love and of bliss. So bliss and love are two words that are synonymous. They mean the same thing only when they're on the spiritual platform, but not on the material platform. So when we look for love on this material platform, it doesn't end in bliss. Eventually, even if the relationship sustains, there will be death. And then the relationship is broken. But the relationship that we, the soul, have with Krishna is eternal. Even death cannot change that. And in case we haven't been able to revive that relationship fully, we will be able to do so in the next life. So that is continuity, that is real happiness. Happiness is that which perpetuates, which continues, goes on and on, which doesn't end. Happiness that ends is not real happiness. And therefore, when we look for real happiness, we mustn't be impatient. We must look in the things of the spirit rather than in the things related to matter. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that there's three types of happiness. One is happiness in the mode of ignorance, where we have no conception at all of anything good or bad, harmful or beneficial. We can't distinguish between happiness and distress. For example, a person who is intoxicated has no conception of where he or she is, has no idea of reality. In an intoxicated state, a person just doesn't understand himself or herself. And they can do all sorts of things when they are in a state of intoxication. So that kind of happiness, quote unquote happiness, is happiness in the mode of ignorance. It actually isn't happiness. But because people think it's happiness, so Krishna includes that in the definition of happiness. Then there's happiness in the mode of passion. And the word passion is indicative of what this kind of happiness is. The pleasure that comes from the things of this world, from good food, good clothes, passionate living, essentially, the physical pleasures of the body. Now this is happiness in the mode of passion. And at a subtle level, it also means the happiness we derive from becoming famous, well-known, worshipped by others. That's also a different kind of happiness. The happiness that one gets out of power, that's something really intoxicating. Political leaders are after power. They may not be after money so much. They've made enough money, but they're after power. I think in China, the widow of Mao Zedong, at one time the big leader in China, I read a quote by his wife. She said, today, people are enamored by sex because they don't know what intoxication power can bring. You get the point? So she was trying to say that people think that sex is the highest pleasure in life, but let them taste power. Then they'll understand what real happiness is. That was her conception. So she was thinking that's power. That's another kind of happiness, quote unquote, happiness in the mode of passion. But power doesn't last forever, as we all know. And usually those in power are moved from the position of power in very rude ways sometimes violent ways. One who lives by the sword dies by the sword. So the mode of happiness in the mode of passion also doesn't sustain. Actually, the happiness in the mode of ignorance is not happiness at all. It's just sheer misery. Happiness in the mode of passion has some temporary pleasure, but that pleasure leads to pain eventually. That's the characteristic of happiness in the mode of passion. It seems like nectar in the beginning, Krishna says, but it turns out to be poison in the end. And then there's happiness in the mode of goodness. And as the word again indicates, that happiness is that which is produced by things which are based on knowledge, based on qualities like compassion, forgiveness, kindness, intellectual work. So the person sitting and studying his books and likes it, is very absorbed in pursuit of knowledge. So the happiness that comes out of pursuit of knowledge is an example of happiness in the mode of goodness. So there are different kinds of happiness in the mode of the happiness comes in helping others, right? Not for name and fame, but genuinely you feel happy when you try to help somebody, say a poor person or something like that. But all three kinds of happiness are material. And there's something called transcendental happiness, spiritual happiness, that goes beyond these three types of happiness. The mode of goodness is sometimes synonymously used by Krishna here as transcendental happiness. And that kind of happiness appears like poison in the beginning, but is nectar in the end. So when we endeavor for real happiness, which is spiritual, then we have to work hard at it. We have to lead a life of voluntarily accepting some restraints in our life. We abstain from doing certain things that we might otherwise have liked to do. We do certain activities which perhaps we may not like to do. But we do these things because it's eventually for our spiritual good. And we know that if we do that, then we will eventually taste that higher spiritual happiness. So this is called austerity. Austerity means voluntarily accepting some inconvenience for the sake of a higher spiritual goal, for higher spiritual happiness. So in spiritual life, we don't look for things instantly. We are prepared to wait because all good things take time. Therefore, in spirituality, you don't want an instant nirvana, an instant salvation. Many times when people come to spirituality, they expect that there should be results very quickly. For example, it's explained that when you chant the names of Krishna, there will be purification of the heart, and love for Krishna develops in the heart. And when you experience divine love, that is real happiness. It's impossible to describe in words what that experience is, what that bliss of divine love is. Only a person who has experienced it can understand it. But nobody else can understand it. It's very hard to describe in words. So initially there is austerity, there is inconvenience. And we think, well, I don't want to restrict my freedom. I'm a free person. And I want to be free to pursue my happiness. But actually that freedom to pursue my version or my conception of happiness is just another form of that instant happiness. That freedom actually turns out to be our bondage. Because we become bound. Once you perform that these activities that give us instant pleasure, we are bound by the karmic reaction of that. And it goes on and on and on. This is called the cycle of karma. So freedom leads us to bondage. But self-imposed restrictions, self-imposed, reasonable, authentic or authorized restrictions lead us to real freedom. This is the irony or the paradox. If you really want to be free and happy, then you have to restrain yourself if you want something higher. The lower grade of pleasure, of happiness, is for those who don't want to accept any restraints on their life. The lower grade of happiness or the pleasure is meant for those who whimsically want to be free, meaning that they want to do whatever they want to do. They want to just do whatever they like. They don't like to be told that this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do, because they think that's a constraint, that's an interference with their free will, with their freedom, and they don't want their freedom to be compromised in any way, which is incidentally another reason why relationships don't work out nowadays anyway, because everyone has become so individualistic, so self-centered, so egotistic, that they're more concerned about their own desires than about trying to sacrifice one's desires for another's happiness. That spirit is not there. The more we try to be free in this world, the more we suffer. Because the more we get addicted only to our own selfish, instant happiness. And because that happiness is going to last only for a short while, everything connected to that happiness, which brought us that happiness, will also disappear shortly. So here is the great irony. By trying to be free, unlimitedly free, without restrictions, in the name of living in a free world, we deprive ourselves of the greatest benefit of real happiness. We actually do ourselves a great disservice. We owe it to ourselves to give us the real thing. But now, in the name of freedom, we are doing with the make-believe thing. We are playing with the reflection, not with the real thing. If you want the real thing, you have to be willing to pay the price for it. Nothing comes free in life. I don't mean in monetary terms, but in terms of some effort, some inconvenience that we have to voluntarily take up. And we also have to be patient. If we think, well, I want it instantly, no, that's not going to happen. So sometimes people who are practicing Krishna consciousness, they say, well, I've been chanting for 2 years and I still haven't got these, eruptions of ecstasy of love of Godhead. I still don't have tears flowing down from my eyes in love of Krishna, and my hairs of my body don't stand on end. My body doesn't tremble in devotional ecstasy. And I ask them, well, do you know how many lifetimes you've spent without this? We don't know. Millions and millions of lives. And now you've started chanting Hare Krishna only for a few years, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And you have to undo everything that you've done for millions of lifetimes. And you think it's going to happen like that, instantly? So we superimpose our mindsets or our expectations, our philosophies of life from before we came to spiritual life into spiritual life as well. And because we've been expecting instant results, instant happiness from our activities in the outside world, we expect the same in our spiritual life as well. To some degree, it does happen. We do feel some ecstasy, we do feel some happiness the moment we contact the process of Krishna consciousness. However, as time goes on, we realize that we have to be patient as well. We have to work at it. We have to be like that man who made the mortar in Taj Mahal. We have to work at it slowly, patiently, persevere with it day after day, day after day. Challenges, temptations, distractions will be numerous. But if you want the real thing, then that's the price we have to pay. And many people today would consider this as bondage. But that bondage is actually the cause of our real freedom. The real freedom from birth and death. Real freedom from the cycle of karma. Real freedom from the shackles of this material body, which is only a cause of suffering. This material body cannot give us happiness. It's not meant to, it's not designed to give us happiness. It's only designed to give us pain. That's the nature of this body. Every single day you're conscious of something that's not quite right in your body, isn't it? Either it's hunger, or it's thirst, or it's something or the other. This body has a way to remind you of its existence. This body is basically a state of discomfort. I don't mean to decry the body in unconditional terms, because this body can also be used for spiritual purposes, because that's all we have now. But in order to do that, then we have to change our way of thinking. Then we have to move from the paradigm of instant happiness to the paradigm of divine happiness. And then we have to work for it step by step. So this material body then, being a cause of pain, cannot give us happiness. It is a reflection of the real happiness. The real happiness, as I mentioned earlier, lies in the happiness of the soul, in that love that we develop for Krishna. So why should we then deprive ourselves of our birthright? Somebody said, freedom is my birthright. I'd rather say more than freedom, yes, it is freedom, which is our birthright, but we have to know what that freedom is. I'd say happiness is our birthright, love is our birthright, but we don't look for it in the right place. We're looking for it in the things of this world. So instant happiness is not something that someone with a spiritual bent of mind would like to be running after. When we patiently pursue spiritual goals, we understand that there are challenges. Our previous conditionings will draw us into desires that we should well avoid. But that's the battle, that's the inner battle. And we have this conquest of the inner self that is very essential. The conquest of the outside world is a conquest, well, all right. You have great conquerors like Alexander, Napoleon, so on and so forth. But eventually they all had to bite the dust. The real hero is one who can emerge victorious in the inner conquest. And only such a hero is entitled to taste the nectar of that real happiness, which will be everlasting, because it's on the platform of the body. If you analyze the nature of the body, you will see there's nothing in this body that can actually give rise to happiness. And what we call happiness is essentially some relief from distress. If you go to a hospital because you have a friend who's got some injury or an accident or something like that, or an illness, and then you ask the friend, okay, I've come to see you, how are you? And the friend says, all right, I'm okay. Well, if you're okay, how come you're in the hospital? Well, you're not okay. We say it because that's what we're supposed to say. We're okay, I'm okay. You know, in the olden days, kings would punish criminals in various bizarre and ingenious ways. And one of the ways for punishing criminals was to dunk them in the water. So they would have the prisoner or the criminal caught, taken to a place where there was a body of water, and they would be dunked into water and held underwater till such time as the person was at his last fraction of a second where he couldn't hold his breath any longer. And then he'd be pulled out. And as his head was pulled out, he breathed deep, and that breath was sheer ecstasy for him. Because he hadn't been able to breathe, and now he was able to breathe. And as soon as he had a gulp of fresh air, down again into the water. And then again he was pulled up. And again, ecstasy. Now, the question is, that ecstasy that this man experienced when his head was pulled out of the water, is that really ecstasy? Is that really happiness? No. That's just a normal situation for all of us. We're breathing, right? Ever since we came into this room, we've been breathing many times. Every moment of the day we are breathing, but we don't think this is ecstasy. So why was that man thinking it's ecstasy? Because he had been in so much pain, not being able to breathe. When he was given relief from that pain, he experienced that as happiness or ecstasy. In other words, the happiness of this world is not really something positive. It's just essentially a negation of distress and a relief from pain. But when we talk of something really positive, we're talking of spiritual happiness that will last forever and ever and ever. So for those who want real freedom, here's the formula. Chant Hare Krishna and be happy. One of the ways of keeping people happy is to also not bore them with too many long lectures. And we are professionals doing that. We have to speak, and sometimes we speak for a long time. But I will halt here because I will leave the floor open for questions and discussions and comments on this idea of real happiness. Real happiness comes by chanting the names of Krishna and developing our relationship with Krishna. And to the degree that we are attached to our ideas of instant happiness, we will be depriving ourselves of that real happiness. So on this note, I conclude my lecture here. I thank you all very much for being very patient listeners. You've been very attentive. Even though I've spoken in a very monotonous tone, and I've spoken very serious philosophy, and I haven't cracked any jokes today. Usually I crack a few jokes because, we have to keep people awake. And so I usually test it out and see how it goes. But today I didn't need to crack that many jokes. So anyway, thank you for your attention. And I'll leave the floor open for questions and comments if you have any. Please feel free to speak up. You can just raise your hand and we can have a little discussion here. Yes?
So once you attain that true happiness that you're speaking of, does that mean nothing will ever bother you again? You'll never suffer any sort of pain?
Sorry, I still have to get accustomed to the accent here. Can you speak a little slowly, please?
Okay, so once you attain that freedom and that happiness that you're talking about, the transcendental happiness, does that mean nothing will ever bother you again? As in you'll never feel any pain?
Okay, so it's a question that once we experience that transcendental happiness, will we not take another material body again?
Or rather, would we feel any pain whatsoever? Any more inconveniences?
We won't have any more inconveniences. Will we not have any more inconveniences? Once you leave this body, once you attain spiritual perfection, even when in this body you will experience some spiritual delight, even with this body. But because we are in this body, therefore the body will do its job, which means to give us pain. So there will be old age, there will be disease, there will be discomfort. But internally we are experiencing that transcendental delight. However, when such a perfected soul, a perfected devotee, leaves the body or dies, then there's no more coming back. Then the person attains a spiritual existence, a spiritual body, and then doesn't take a material body again. Suffering and unhappiness come about because of the material body. So once you're through with the material body, no suffering. So someone may think, well then let me commit suicide and finish the material body off. But that's not how it works, because that's a terrible karma. Performing suicide is a great bad karma. So then we have to take birth again and suffer the consequences of that. So if you want to get rid of the material body once and for all, then we have to follow the bona fide route. And that's what Bhakti Yoga is all about. So once the perfect Bhakti Yogi leaves this world, then yes, no more coming back. No more material bodies. No more suffering. No birth, no death, no old age, no disease, no jobs, no taxes, no worries. Okay? Yes?
This instant happiness that you're talking about discussing, I mean, particularly in the West, it's just random people so like.
It's rampant.
Yeah, rampant and rammed down people's throat. You know, like.
Ram down people's throat.
Through advertising.
What's okay.
Yeah. So pretty much people take it as there is no other kind of happiness.
Right, right.
So how can we attain to another conception that there is something more than?
Okay, so your question is that especially in the world today, there's such a powerful propaganda and advertising and so on, that instant happiness is the only happiness, and that's the only conception of happiness that people have. And how can we make others understand that there is something other than that? Right? That there is a higher grade of happiness. Right? By explaining, by telling them that there is. Because most people don't know about it. They don't have a conception of any happiness beyond what they've been told. So therefore they don't know anything beyond that. So in a sense you can't blame them because they don't know of it. So therefore it needs to be explained. And after that, if that individual doesn't want to accept the process, then that's his or her free will. That's choice. But our duty is to inform people that there exists such a divine happiness. And it's our birthright to have it regardless of our origin, where we come from, which country, and so on and so forth. As spirit souls, we are all one. There is no distinction in terms of nationality and gender and socio-economic status and so on. As spirit souls, we are all part and parcels of Krishna. We are all meant to love Krishna. So that's something we should be informing people, giving them a choice. Now they hardly have a choice. They're just mesmerized into, when you walk down the streets here, the glitter and glamour of the shopping arenas, just tempting you with so many goods displayed attractively to tempt you to buy them. And then you feel, oh, I need this, I need that, I want this, I want that. This is happiness. That's the propaganda, right? So we need to tell people, no, there's something beyond. Hello, wait, I have something else to tell you. We have to tell people. And then leave it to them. Okay? But it's because of lack of spiritual information. And also what happens is, you see, spirituality has acquired a bad name because religions have been at the epicenter of so many problems. So people say, oh, religion, I better not have anything to do with it. Religion is just causing so many problems, so better I have nothing to do with it. So that's also another conception. So even if they have some idea that there could be something spiritual, but they think that there's so much that's wrong with religion that I better not have anything to do with it. I might as well be satisfied with this instant paradigm, however incomplete the whole thing may be. So it needs proper explanation of what real religion is, what real spirituality is. Right? People now have very narrow, parochial considerations of religion, spirituality, and so on. But we need to give them a broader and a deeper, a more sublime understanding of this. Then they will, their eyes will be open and say, oh really, it's like that, okay. They may accept it. Right? Yes?
Do you think it's necessary to cease all pursuit for temporary pleasure in this human life, and so after that we can direct our pursuits towards spiritual pleasure? Is that necessary to stop all that?
Okay, interesting question. Your question is it necessary to go through and experience all the pleasures of this world before we try to attain divine happiness or transcendental happiness, right?
Or not, or just stop completely trying to.
Okay, should we explore instant happiness, right?
Yeah, or just stop exploring.
Or should we stop exploring?
Pursuit, or continue it simultaneously while pursuing spiritual happiness.
Okay, so should we stop exploring avenues for instant enjoyment and just focus on spiritual goals? Or can we do both together? A bit of this and a bit of that, right? It all depends on your conviction of understanding the spiritual goal. For one who's really convinced, there is no time to waste. Right? So why waste time with other things? Get down to business. We should focus on the real thing. Why should we waste time experimenting with this and trying out this and that when we know for sure it's not going to give us happiness? For sure. No one in the history of humanity has ever succeeded in doing so. And nobody's doing it now, and nobody will do it in the future. So if you're convinced of that, then why should we try to spend valuable human life? Because death can come anytime, anything can happen anytime. So why should we waste this valuable time exploring things that we know anyway? We know that it's not going to give us happiness. So why not get down to the real thing? Why waste time also doing both together? So really it's a question of the degree to which we are convinced about the reality. And that needs spiritual knowledge, it needs spiritual practice. And because the world outside is very powerful, the attractions and temptations of the world are very, very strong. They can sweep us off our feet. And even a serious transcendentalist can be swept off his or her feet by this world. So anyway, it's a difficult process. But as I said, If you want something really good, you have to be willing to take some pain for it. You have to be willing to sacrifice something for it. So that's the price we have to pay. You can't have both together. That's not possible. You can't cook a meal by lighting the flame of your stove and then pouring water on it and then lighting it again and then pouring water on it. It's not going to happen. Right? So we got to have one pointed attention. Yes, it may be that somebody is not able to do that, which is also all right. But gradually, by coming to the association of spiritually minded people like we are doing now, for example, we make step-by-step advancement. It's not a question of all or nothing. If someone's not able to do that, to unconditionally, with a one-pointed mind, take to the spiritual process, all right, do it at whichever speed you can. Something is better than nothing. And we'll make steady advancement, step by step by step. Perfection is, in any case, not achieved in a day. It takes a lifetime. Okay?
I see. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yes.
To what degree do you think someone can lead a spiritual life and pursue transcendental happiness without believing in a concept like reincarnation?
Okay, to what degree can we pursue the concept of can we go for transcendental happiness without believing in the concept of reincarnation? I'd say not very far. For the simple reason that what is that spiritual happiness? What does it pertain to? We talked about instant happiness as pertaining to the body, this material body, made of flesh and blood and bones and so on. What does spiritual happiness pertain to? The soul? What is the soul? So we have to know something about the soul. And the first thing we learn about the soul is it's eternal. And if the soul is eternal, and the body is definitely not eternal, so what happens to the soul when the body is destroyed at death? Where was the soul before the body was born? So where is the question of continuation of spiritual happiness or a build-up of spiritual happiness over a period of lifetimes if you don't believe in reincarnation? Which incidentally is one of the most sublimely logical and rational things to believe in. It's just so simple and straightforward that it's astonishing that people find it difficult to believe. Because you can't explain the things of this world and the varieties and the natural discrepancies and inequalities that we see in nature unless we invoke the concept of reincarnation. Why is somebody born in a rich family, someone born in a poor family, someone born mentally challenged, someone born with a brilliant mind, someone born with a congenital health defect, someone born healthy, someone born ugly, someone born beautiful? Why these discrepancies? We are all struggling for an egalitarian society, for a society in which everyone will be equal, but it's not possible. Nature will not permit egalitarianism for the simple reason that we are individuals who have free will, who want to do things we want to do. And therefore we have karma, we perform activities, we get the reactions, and those reactions come in the form of these different situations. So we cannot explain why this diversity exists in newly born children unless we invoke the idea of a previous life. So therefore, not only is it logical and sensible, but it's necessary for us to believe in the idea of reincarnation and the eternality of the soul and the presence of a spiritual realm beyond this one. to be able to attain truly spiritual happiness, which will be truly everlasting. Many things that go by the name of happiness, let's say there are many yoga practitioners who may raise their chakras to a certain level to experience certain types of thrills or certain types of pleasures which are very subtle, but that should not be confused with something spiritual. It's just a very subtle psychological kind of phenomenon. The chakras are very subtle. So even that kind of happiness that you receive by performing these different types of meditation is not real happiness, it's not spiritual. It's subtle material. Subtler than even the other forms of subtle material pleasures. So if we genuinely want spiritual happiness, then we have to have our conceptions clear on the eternality of the soul. Otherwise, the foundation is knocked out. The whole premise of true spiritual happiness is that we are essentially spiritual beings. We are eternal spirit souls. We are part and parcel of the eternal Supreme Soul, Krishna. And we have a relationship eternally of love. So reviving that eternal relationship of the eternal soul with eternal Krishna is spiritual happiness. So unless we accept the eternality of the soul and of Krishna and of the relationship between them, and as a consequence of the existence of reincarnation, we cannot experience spiritual happiness. Right? We can start, as a hypothetical, we can take it as an axiomatic truth and start with it, even if we don't have conviction. Theoretically accept it, even if we're not convinced. Start the process, and gradually things become clear. Okay? Yes.
What would you say to the usefulness of trying to pursue spiritual happiness in other avenues than following Krishna? Like, if you choose another theology or a philosophy, even if you choose one that does follow reincarnation as a belief, is that useful, or is it only sort of as a means to an end?
Okay, so your question is, what if we follow other methods of attaining transcendental happiness, and especially if these methods also believe in reincarnation? Yes? Well, it depends on what that other method is. There's so many methods out there. And if that method brings out your inherent latent love of God, fine. To the degree that the process or the method brings out that latent love of God within you, to that degree we can say that method is bona fide or effective. But if that process doesn't succeed in bringing out the love of God that's within you, to that degree it's not perfect and bona fide. So that's your check, test it out. How much can we attain love for God like this, love for Krishna like this? So they may have some other conception of Krishna, okay, but there are symptoms for love. Just as for love amongst two people also there are symptoms. So also for one who has developed love for God, there are symptoms. For example, I'm not a scholar in Christianity, but I have heard a few things and read a few things. Solomon, for example, in the Bible. A mystery. One of the great mysteries of this world and of the Bible. They can't figure out Solomon. Because Solomon spoke about the tresses of the beloved, and he was speaking just like he was speaking about a lover in the modern day world, how an ordinary poet would write about a lover but he was speaking about God. And generally in the Christian tradition, you don't have people who express that kind of sentiment towards God. So obviously he must have been some kind of an evolved person who evolved even more than what his fellow brothers at that time understood of that tradition. He must have risen far beyond them to be able to have this spontaneous outpouring of love like that. So within other traditions it's possible. So the test is to what degree you've developed that love. In Krishna consciousness, that's the focus. So it's much easier to do it. Because you understand who Krishna is, and there's many, many easy ways for us to develop our relationship with Krishna. Krishna is a very fun-loving God. Krishna is very easy to get along with. He's not very demanding. In a sense, he's a little demanding, but he's also very fun-loving. He's not your typical conception of God where he's always there to punish you for all the wrongs you've done. He's not always there to send you to hell. He's there to help you to develop love for him. So his business is transcendental enjoyment. So by connecting with Krishna, it's very easy to invoke our dormant sense of love, of divine love. Okay? Okay, we need to end here. Yes, that's the end of our divine love for today. But no, it's not, because this is everlasting. True love will go on, and that's the path. And I hope and pray that we all sitting here in this room today can move on this path in this very fascinating journey for eternal love, for eternal happiness. That love which we've been seeking, but we haven't found, which we've tried to find in the people of this world but have got disappointed. That love about which singers have crooned and poets have written reams and reams of papers, that love is available here with Krishna. And that love is real happiness, eternal happiness. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.